Knowledge, in its purest form, does not originate in us. We are not the fountain, we are the stream through which it flows. Every insight, every truth, every spark of understanding points back to the divine source. This is why when a person discovers truth, it feels less like invention and more like recognition, as if the truth had always existed and was simply waiting to be unveiled. Our minds are not self-sustaining fires, but lamps lit by the eternal flame of God's wisdom. To realize this is to free ourselves from the illusion that we are the masters of truth, when in reality we are its stewards. The human mind is a vessel entrusted with treasures beyond measure. No one chose their capacity for thought, their ability to reason, or their hunger to know. These are gifts to be cherished, nurtured, and directed toward the good. When you grasp a mathematical law, when you are moved by poetry, when you discern justice from injustice, you are not merely flexing your brain's mechanics. You are touching something that transcends you. It is God breathing His wisdom into the clay of humanity, reminding you that you were made for more than survival. You were made for truth. Yet, here lies the danger. When knowledge is mistaken as a personal possession, pride takes root. The scholar who forgets the source of wisdom becomes a fool in disguise. History is littered with brilliant minds who misuse their knowledge to oppress, to deceive, or to glorify themselves. The tragedy of pride in knowledge is that it blinds the heart while illuminating the mind. True wisdom cannot dwell in arrogance, for wisdom itself is the union of truth with humility. To walk in wisdom is to acknowledge with every breath, "This is not mine alone. It was given to me." If knowledge comes from God, then its purpose is not domination but service. You are entrusted with wisdom not so you may stand above others, but so you may lift others up. The doctor who heals, the teacher who enlightens, the leader who guides with integrity, all embody this principle. Knowledge, divorced from compassion, becomes tyranny. But when wedded to love, it becomes a river of healing that touches every life it encounters. To embody God's wisdom is to recognize that truth is never meant to be hoarded. It is meant to be shared. Struggle, too, plays its part in shaping wisdom. No one becomes wise in comfort alone. It is in the wrestle with uncertainty, in the nights of unanswered questions, in the failures that strip away illusion, that we learn dependence on God's direction. The storm teaches what the calm never could. That wisdom is not mere knowledge but discernment, humility, and resilience. Every trial is a refining fire, burning away pride and deepening the vessel so it can hold more of God's truth. To live as an embodiment of divine wisdom is not to walk as if flawless, but to walk as if guided. Each choice, whether in speech, action, or silence, becomes an echo of a greater truth. You are called not only to know wisdom, but to be wisdom, to let your life itself teach, inspire, and illuminate. The world does not only need more educated people, it needs people who live what they know. For when knowledge is rooted in God, it becomes more than intellect. It becomes character, vision, and light for all who walk in darkness. All true wisdom begins in God, and human understanding is but a reflection of His truth. When a child first learns to speak, when a scientist uncovers a hidden law of nature, when an elder shares counsel shaped by years of living, these are not mere accidents of human effort. They are glimpses of something eternal, whispers of a voice greater than ours, signs that truth does not belong to us but is entrusted to us. Knowledge feels discovered, not created, because it was never ours to invent. It is as though we stumble upon treasures buried in the earth, treasures placed there long before we arrived, treasures that point back to the one who authored them. This recognition shifts how we see the very act of knowing. If knowledge were merely the product of our own cleverness, then its meaning would be fragile, vulnerable to being reshaped by our desires or opinions. But when we realize that knowledge flows from a source unshaken by time, culture, or circumstance, then truth becomes something stable, something we can lean upon even when everything else wavers. That is why the human heart feels peace when it encounters genuine truth. It is not meeting an invention, but a reality that was always meant to be known. The mathematician who proves a theorem, the musician who uncovers harmony, the philosopher who discerns justice, all stand in awe not of themselves, but of the vastness of the wisdom they have touched. To know that all wisdom comes from God is also to understand that our minds are not closed systems, but windows through which eternal light enters. When you look at the stars and feel wonder, it is not just your brain firing neurons, it is the divine imprint stirring within you, calling you to look beyond yourself. This is why curiosity is such a powerful gift. It is not simply the urge to accumulate facts, but the hunger to reconnect with the source of all knowledge. Every question you ask, every puzzle you wrestle with, every mystery that stirs your soul is an echo of God's invitation. Seek, and you will find. But this truth is also a sobering reminder of responsibility. If wisdom belongs to God, then we are only stewards of it. To misuse knowledge, to twist truth for selfish ends, is to betray the trust placed in us. Consider how knowledge of fire can warm a home or destroy a city, how knowledge of speech can inspire nations or deceive millions, how knowledge of technology can save lives or enslave hearts. The difference lies not in the knowledge itself, but in the spirit with which it is used. When knowledge is separated from its divine source, it loses its moral compass and becomes dangerous. But when knowledge is held in reverence, used in harmony with the one who gives it, it becomes life, giving and liberating. This recognition also guards us against the arrogance that so often follows human achievement. It is tempting to think that our discoveries prove our greatness, but in reality, they reveal our smallness before an infinite wisdom. The more we uncover, the more we realize how much lies beyond our grasp. The most brilliant minds confess that the deeper they look into the mysteries of the universe, the more they feel dwarfed by its immensity. This humility is not weakness. It is the beginning of wisdom. For to stand in awe of the source of knowledge is to align ourselves with its proper order. Pride blinds, but humility opens the eyes. And yet, acknowledging God as the source of wisdom does not diminish our efforts. It elevates them. For it means that every classroom, every laboratory, every library, every quiet moment of reflection is not a lonely search, but a participation in something divine. It means that the farmer learning the rhythms of soil, the parent teaching a child, the student poring over a text, all are engaged in an act of communion with the one who authored truth itself. This transforms learning from a mere human pursuit into a sacred calling. To study is to worship, to seek understanding is to honor the God who makes understanding possible. At the heart of this keynote lies a simple but profound truth. Knowledge is not a human possession but a divine gift. To receive it with humility, to use it with responsibility, and to share it with love is to recognize that we are not the owners of wisdom but its vessels. Each time we learn, we are not merely expanding our minds, but entering into deeper fellowship with the one who made us, the one who desires that his wisdom be reflected in our lives. Our intellect is not self-created but a gift entrusted to us, a sacred trust that carries both privilege and responsibility. No one chose to be born with the capacity to think, to imagine, to question, or to reason. These abilities are not the product of human invention, they are imprinted within us as part of our very design. The human mind, with all its intricacies, is a vessel, fragile yet capable of holding treasures beyond measure. When we marvel at a great invention or a profound idea, we are not witnessing the triumph of an isolated individual, but the flowering of a gift that was planted within humanity by God Himself. To recognize the mind as a vessel is to understand that it has limits. Just as a clay jar cannot contain the entire ocean, the human intellect cannot hold the fullness of divine wisdom. Yet it can carry enough to nourish, to inspire, and to guide. The gift of intellect is not given so that we may boast of our capacity, but so that we may live responsibly within the measure entrusted to us. A vessel that forgets it is a vessel risks shattering under the illusion of self-sufficiency. The greatest danger of the human mind is not its weakness, but its tendency to imagine itself as the source rather than the receiver of wisdom. Every insight, every discovery, every solution that emerges from human effort is ultimately drawn from this gift. Consider the way a child learns language. No child designs the framework of grammar, yet within months they begin to speak in patterns that mirror complex rules they never studied formally. The capacity for language lies dormant until awakened by use, and that capacity itself is evidence of a mind created for understanding. Or think of the mathematician who spends years searching for a solution, only to describe the final breakthrough as though the answer appeared to them rather than being crafted step by step. Such moments reveal that the mind does not generate truth out of nothing. It uncovers what already exists, serving as a vessel through which truth flows. But to be a vessel of wisdom is not merely to receive, it is to carry and to pour out. Knowledge that is hoarded stagnates, but knowledge that is shared multiplies. The teacher who patiently explains, the doctor who applies learning to heal, the artist who shapes beauty from imagination, all of them are pouring from the vessel entrusted to them. To waste the gift of intellect is to let the vessel sit empty, refusing the very purpose for which it was designed. Responsibility lies not only in acquiring knowledge, but in using it wisely. For a vessel filled but never poured becomes useless. This image of the mind as a vessel also reminds us of its dependence. Just as a jar must be refilled, the human intellect must continually seek renewal. We cannot live off yesterday's insights alone. The student must continue to learn, the leader must remain teachable, the scholar must remain open to correction. Arrogance assumes the vessel is self-filling. Humility acknowledges that wisdom must be sought daily, just as manna had to be gathered each morning in the wilderness. To stop seeking is to begin emptying. At the same time, being a vessel means accepting vulnerability. Clay jars are fragile, and so are our minds. They can be influenced, misled, or even corrupted. What we choose to fill our vessel with matters. If it is filled with lies, arrogance, or trivialities, it cannot carry truth with clarity. A vessel meant for pure water is not meant to hold poison. This is why discernment is essential. What you allow to shape your thoughts, what you feed your mind, what you devote your attention to. All these determine the quality of what flows out of you. To guard the vessel of your mind is to guard the wisdom entrusted to you. And yet, in this fragility lies beauty. A vessel does not need to be flawless to serve its purpose. It needs only to remain open to being filled. Cracks in the vessel do not disqualify it. Sometimes they even allow the light to shine more clearly through it. Human weakness, when surrendered, becomes a channel for divine strength. The gift of intellect is not given to perfect beings but to imperfect ones, that even in their limits they may reflect something of God's wisdom. Thus, to see your mind as a vessel is to recognize both your dependence and your dignity. You are not the source of wisdom, but you are entrusted with it. You did not create your intellect, but you are called to steward it. You cannot contain all truth, but you can hold enough to illuminate the lives around you. And in that stewardship lies the deepest responsibility, to use what has been given not for vanity, not for pride, but for service, growth, and the honor of the one who placed such treasure in jars of clay. Knowledge becomes destructive when it is divorced from humility and reverence for its source. The tragedy of human history is not that we have lacked intelligence, but that we have often misused it. The story repeats itself across generations. Brilliant minds, capable of unlocking the secrets of the universe, also capable of bringing ruin when they forget that wisdom was never their possession to begin with. Pride in knowledge is a silent poison, subtle at first, but devastating in its effect. It convinces us that we are self-sufficient, that we are the architects of truth, that we are gods in our own right. Yet the very moment knowledge is severed from humility, it ceases to guide and begins to corrupt. We see this danger most clearly when knowledge is treated as a weapon. Science, which ought to serve life, can be twisted into instruments of death. Words, which were given as a means to communicate truth, can be bent into lies that enslave the mind. Even wisdom about the human soul, when stripped of reverence, can become manipulation rather than guidance. Pride does not merely distort knowledge. It turns it against the very purposes for which it was given. And once pride has taken root, the person who wields knowledge no longer seeks to serve but to dominate. What makes pride in knowledge so deceptive is that it disguises itself as confidence. Confidence is the humble recognition that one has been entrusted with truth, while pride is the arrogant illusion that one is the source of truth. The confident mind remains teachable, open to correction, aware of its limits. The proud mind believes itself infallible, silencing dissent, resisting reflection, and closing itself off from growth. Confidence is strength under guidance. Pride is strength cut loose from accountability. And just as a ship without a rudder eventually crashes, so does knowledge without humility lead to destruction. Humility, however, does not mean belittling the intellect or denying one's abilities. It is not the false modesty of pretending ignorance where knowledge exists. True humility is the clear-eyed recognition that whatever insight we possess was given, not generated from nothing. It is the discipline of remembering that our minds are vessels, not sources. It is the willingness to kneel before a wisdom greater than ourselves and admit, "What I know is but a drop in the ocean of truth." Such humility does not weaken knowledge, it strengthens it, for it grounds it in reality. Pride in knowledge blinds us, while humility sharpens our vision. The proud see only their own reflection in the mirror of learning, but the humble see through it to the eternal truth beyond. The proud mind, in seeking to glorify itself, actually shrinks, for it shuts itself off from all that lies beyond its grasp. The humble mind expands, because it knows there is always more to learn, always more to receive. Paradoxically, the one who admits how little they know often ends up growing wiser than the one who boasts of knowing everything. Examples of this pattern are everywhere. Nations rise to power on the back of innovation, only to crumble when arrogance convinces them they are untouchable. Leaders inspire through vision and knowledge, only to destroy trust when pride turns them inward. Even in daily life, we see how relationships suffer when one person treats their knowledge as a weapon of superiority rather than a gift to be shared. Pride isolates, humility connects. Knowledge without humility breeds division. Knowledge with humility builds unity. This is why reverence for the source of wisdom is essential. Knowledge, when held in reverence, becomes a form of worship. To study is not merely to accumulate information, but to acknowledge the author of truth. To speak with wisdom is not merely to display intelligence, but to honor the one who gave the tongue its power. Reverence restores knowledge to its rightful purpose, not to inflate the self, but to reflect the glory of God. Pride seeks to possess truth, reverence seeks to serve it, and in serving truth we find freedom. The danger of pride is not limited to individuals, it infects societies. A culture that glorifies intellect while dismissing reverence becomes arrogant, assuming it can define morality without reference to anything higher. Such societies often advance quickly in knowledge, but decline just as quickly in wisdom. The result is imbalance, technical brilliance paired with moral confusion, abundance of information paired with poverty of meaning. This imbalance is the inevitable fruit of knowledge detached from humility. Without reverence, even the brightest achievements cast long shadows, and yet there is hope. For pride, though powerful, can be unlearned. The mind can be retrained to remember its place as a vessel. Reverence can be restored when one dares to look beyond themselves and acknowledge that the source of wisdom has always been greater than human cleverness. Each time a scholar admits the limits of their field, each time a leader seeks counsel before acting, each time a person bows in gratitude for insight given, pride is dethroned and humility is enthroned. In that humility, knowledge becomes safe again, safe to use, safe to share, safe to build with rather than destroy. Knowledge must be used to heal, to guide, and to build, not to manipulate or oppress. The measure of wisdom is not how much one knows, but how one applies what is known. It is easy to be clever, to dazzle with facts, to dominate conversations with information, but wisdom is tested in its fruit. If the application of knowledge leaves others diminished, fearful, or broken, then it has betrayed its divine purpose. But if it brings healing, courage, and renewal, then it is fulfilling the reason it was given. Knowledge is never neutral. It either builds or destroys, depending on the spirit with which it is wielded. When wisdom is rightly applied, it becomes an instrument of service. Consider the physician who spends years mastering the mysteries of the human body. Their knowledge of biology, chemistry, and anatomy is not a personal trophy, but a means to restore health. Their gift is realized not in the accumulation of data, but in the steady hands that set a bone, the compassionate words that reassure a patient, the discernment that chooses the right remedy at the right moment. In such acts, knowledge becomes more than intellect. It becomes an offering of life. The same is true for the teacher, whose task is not merely to transfer information, but to shape minds and nurture souls. A teacher who views knowledge as service sees each lesson as planting seeds in fertile soil. They do not hoard learning as a treasure kept in secret, nor do they wield it as a weapon to intimidate. Instead, they pour themselves into others, multiplying their wisdom by giving it away. And what is remarkable is that in giving, they do not lose but gain. Knowledge shared is not diminished, it expands, echoing through the lives it touches. But the danger lies in treating knowledge as a tool for domination. History is heavy with examples of leaders who used learning to manipulate rather than guide. Words meant to enlighten were twisted into propaganda. Laws meant to protect were reshaped to oppress. Such distortions reveal what happens when knowledge is divorced from love. A sharp mind without a compassionate heart becomes a tyrant, not a servant. The scholar who uses insight to belittle others, the politician who twists truth to secure power, the innovator who exploits invention for greed, all betray the very purpose of the wisdom entrusted to them. This is why the moral dimension of knowledge cannot be ignored. Knowledge is powerful, but power without direction is perilous. Just as fire can warm or consume, knowledge can build or destroy. It must be guided by love if it is to serve rightly. Love transforms knowledge from cold data into living wisdom. It tempers the sharpness of intellect with gentleness. It restrains the impulse to dominate, and it redirects ambition towards service. To act without love, even with great knowledge, is to misuse the gift. But to act with love, even with limited knowledge, is to honor its source. Guidance is another vital purpose of knowledge. People are often lost, uncertain which path to take, overwhelmed by the noise of competing voices. A wise person uses knowledge not to push others into submission, but to illuminate the way. The mentor who quietly advises, the friend who listens and speaks truth, the leader who charts a course with integrity, all embody the guiding role of wisdom. They do not dictate as masters, but serve as lights along the path. Their knowledge does not enslave, but empowers, enabling others to walk with clarity and courage. Knowledge also carries the responsibility to build. The world is full of brokenness, broken systems, broken relationships, broken hearts. Knowledge is not meant to stand aloof from these fractures, but to enter into them as a tool of restoration. The engineer designing safe bridges, the judge seeking justice, the parent shaping a child's character, all are builders using knowledge to repair and strengthen what is fragile. To build is harder than to destroy, but it is the truest test of wisdom. Destruction may be quick, but construction is enduring. When knowledge is used to build, it leaves legacies that stretch far beyond a single lifetime. And yet building requires patience and humility. It is easier to manipulate than to heal, easier to coerce than to guide, easier to exploit than to construct. But the ease of manipulation is an illusion, for what is built on fear or falsehood will eventually collapse. Only what is built in truth, humility, and love will endure. The wise understand this, and so they choose the harder road, the road of service, of patience, of building stone by stone rather than seizing through force. The truest embodiment of wisdom is not found in grand displays of intellect, but in quiet acts of service. The most brilliant person may be forgotten if their knowledge was used for selfish ends, while the one who used even simple understanding to heal, guide, and build will be remembered as wise. Wisdom is measured not in applause, but in the lives uplifted by its touch. To use knowledge rightly is to align oneself with its source, reflecting the character of the one who gave it, not a tyrant demanding submission, but a creator who builds, heals, and guides with love. Challenges refine our wisdom, teaching us dependence on God's guidance. No one becomes wise by living in ease alone. Knowledge may grow in the classroom, but wisdom matures in the crucible of struggle. It is in adversity and unanswered questions, in the moments when our own understanding proves insufficient, that we are shaped most deeply. Comfort can make us complacent, but hardship forces us to stretch beyond ourselves, to admit our limits, and to look upward for strength we do not possess. Struggle is not a detour on the path to wisdom. It is the very path itself. When trials come, they expose the fragility of pride. A person who once believed they had all the answers suddenly finds their knowledge inadequate. The scientist who faces personal loss, the leader confronted by a crisis they cannot control, the student who wrestles with failure, all discover that intellect alone is not enough. Facts cannot heal grief, logic cannot erase fear, and theories cannot restore hope. It is in these moments that dependence on God becomes not an abstract idea, but a lived necessity. Struggle strips away the illusion of self-sufficiency, teaching us that wisdom is more than information. It is trust, humility, and discernment shaped by God's hand. Struggle also refines our character. It is one thing to know that patience is a virtue, and another to practice patience when waiting becomes unbearable. It is one thing to learn about perseverance, and another to keep walking when every step feels heavy. Through difficulty, knowledge is tested and transformed into lived reality. The student who once memorized principles of resilience learns what resilience means by rising again after failure. The person who once admired stories of faith becomes a person of faith by enduring darkness with trust. Struggles are the furnaces where knowledge is melted and reshaped into wisdom that can withstand the weight of life. Moreover, struggle reveals the depth of God's guidance in ways prosperity never can. In moments of clarity, it is easy to believe we are steering our own lives. But in moments of confusion, when the path ahead is clouded, we learn to listen more carefully to the quiet voice of God. Struggles sharpen our spiritual hearing. They teach us to wait, to seek, to discern. What seemed like delay becomes preparation. What felt like loss becomes redirection. What appeared as weakness becomes a hidden strength. The guidance of God is most often recognized in hindsight, but struggle trains us to trust it even when it is unseen. Consider the wisdom of those who have endured great trials. Their words carry weight, not because they have read more books than others, but because they have lived through fire and emerged with faith intact. The mother who has walked through grief, the teacher who has faced rejection, the worker who has endured poverty, all carry a depth of wisdom that cannot be learned in comfort. Their knowledge is embodied, refined through tears, and made real by endurance. They remind us that wisdom is not about escaping struggle, but about being transformed by it. Struggles also foster empathy, one of the most vital expressions of wisdom. A person untouched by difficulty may understand suffering in theory, but a person who has lived it understands with the heart. The wounded healer becomes a guide for others, not through lofty words but through presence, compassion, and shared humanity. When knowledge is refined through struggle, it becomes gentler, less arrogant, more attuned to the needs of others. Hardship softens the sharp edges of intellect, shaping it into wisdom that can comfort and heal. There is also a hidden paradox. Struggles do not diminish the gift of knowledge. They expand its depth. The musician who has lived through sorrow plays with greater soul. The poet who has faced despair writes with greater truth. The leader who has suffered betrayal leads with greater integrity. Struggle is not the enemy of wisdom, it is its teacher. To reject hardship is to reject the very process that turns knowledge into living truth. And yet, struggle does not mean defeat. Wisdom is not the absence of weakness, but the recognition of where strength truly lies. Dependence on God's guidance does not erase difficulty, but it provides an anchor in the storm. Struggles remind us that wisdom is not about controlling every outcome, but about trusting the one who sees beyond what we can. Each hardship becomes a lesson, each failure a teacher, each obstacle a stepping stone, if we allow it to draw us closer to God. The wise are not those who have avoided struggle, but those who have learned to walk through it with faith, humility, and hope.